Hi, I'm Kate. This is my channel, and this is a monthly reading wrap up for January 2021. I read 15 things in January, which is an exceptionally good reading month for me. So that involved a few things. That involved 3 non-fiction books, a classic, 2 speculative fiction books, plus one that I DNF'd, 3 literary /book club adjacent books, 5 romance novels, and a crime novel. So I had a really diverse reading month. So I'm going to quickly give you a bit of a rundown of each of them because I don't want to spend a forever long video this afternoon. So I suppose I'll start with the non-fiction books that I read first. So these are the 3 that I read. I'm going to talk about this one first because this is the most confusing one. That is A Short History of Seafaring by Brian Lavery. This was a complete impulse purchase probably about a year ago, and I just literally picked up and went, that looks cool, and bought it, and it's been sitting on my shelf ever since. As I do want to read more non-fiction and get a broader general knowledge base. So I thought this might be an interesting way to get some broad general knowledge. It wasn't great, mostly because it's kind of got like that encyclopedia kind of layout where it's every few pages there's like infographics, and let me see if I can get an actual page of infographics, like these kinds of pages, and very short little entries that cover the history of seafaring. But there doesn't seem to be a central thesis to the book. It's literally just collecting stories and the timeline. But there doesn't seem to be an overarching thrust of this is what's caused change and development in the history of seafaring, or the ocean has brought the world together, it's so wide, but it's not that far once we've developed these technologies. None of that. It was just this series of events. And I couldn't always tell why things were selected. Like I think there was a single mention of the Titanic sinking, which to me, I thought that might be a reasonable thing, not just because it was a big disaster, but because, and I know it wasn't the greatest loss of life at sea either, but it's quite well known. There were just, especially early on, there were just random little bits about random sea voyages, and I'm like, is this just because this was so long ago that there aren't really any accounts except for this one account? And so we can talk about this particular voyage because it happened to have a passenger who wrote a diary. And then there's like random bits and pieces, like you got this Irish teenager, the poetry that she wrote. She got like excerpts from her poetry as she was emigrating from Ireland to Australia. But I don't know why we got her poetry. It's just there. So I think I'm interested in the ocean. I'm interested in sea voyages. But I think I want something that's a bit more directed, has a point to it rather than an encyclopedia kind of version. The next 2 ones that I've read are Australian Indigenous authors talking about Indigenous issues. This is just something generally that I'm wanting to get better at, about knowing more about the history of this country and the perspectives of the people who live there, particularly the Indigenous population, because it is the oldest surviving culture in the world, and I don't know as much as I feel like I should. So I'm trying to get better at it by reading about it. So this one is called Songlines, The Power and Promise. This is coming from a series of books. It's the first in a series of non-fiction books about like the next one is design and there's country, so I think it's taking like a topic and looking at it from an Indigenous perspective. So this one is kind of memory systems and systems of knowledge, you store information in your head. Basically, Indigenous peoples did this through something called Songlines. This could have been much more interesting. Unfortunately, it couldn't quite decide what it was about and how to approach it. The parts about Indigenous practice were really good, but the bits about, you could learn all of the, using this system, you can keep all of the information about, you could remember the name of every country in the world in order of population. Okay, but why? And also that's a different book. If I want to learn how to improve my memory in that way, I feel like that's a different book. So again, not great, but I'm glad that I read it, and I would be interested to see what the next books in the series are going to do, especially design. I think that one could be quite interesting. The month of January has the most contentious date in the Australian year in it, which is January 26, which is officially known as Australia Day, but is being contested and it's often called Invasion Day because it is the day that European settlers arrived in Australia and declared it belonging to the British Crown. And it signals genocide, basically, and the theft of this country from the Indigenous people, so why would we want to celebrate that? This book is about that. It's not about that moment in history, but about what it means to celebrate Australia Day and what we are celebrating when we are celebrating Australia. So this is by Stan Grant, who is an Aboriginal man who has been quite a well-known journalist, and a few years ago he was named the Australian of the Year. He's got quite a few books out. He's an excellent writer, and I found this book really interesting because Stan Grant, as an Aboriginal man, is undecided on the issue of Australia Day, or Change the Date as the movement is known. He agrees that we need to have a date to celebrate Australia, but he was also unsure about what exactly it is that we're celebrating, because if we're celebrating the Australian character, what does that mean? What does that involve? Because there is this thing in our history, this big black hole that we don't acknowledge, or that we don't like to acknowledge, and that we shrug off as something that happened a long time ago and we don't need to worry about it anymore. And if that is part of our national character, then why do we want to celebrate that? Meanwhile, he's also like, but there's so many good things about this country, and there are so many amazing things about Australian people. So it's quite balanced, and it was beautifully written and quite intellectual, I found, even though it was a very easy read. So I do recommend that, and I'm glad that I read it in time for Australia Day this year. I've been meaning to for the last couple of years. Okay, so then I'm going to talk about, my book club books / book club adjacent books. My book club reads books about unlikable female characters, usually written by women. So we meet every month, but then we don't meet over the summer. And then February is our first meeting of the year, and we usually do 2 books, with the idea being that we've read these two books over that summer break, and they usually complement each other in some way. So the 2 books that we've read this time have been If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha and Breasts and Eggs by Miko Kawakami. So I suppose these are books about modern Asian women. This one is set in South Korea and this one in Japan. And there's lots of issues of the place of the modern Asian woman within her own society, and issues of body image and beauty, plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, relationships with other women, relationships with family, particularly children and parents. I found both of these books okay. I think this one was more approachable, I think. just because there was several different women whose perspectives we got to, and I think across the three of them, most people could perhaps find one that they could relate to. And it was very easy to read, quite straightforward, and not very long, and the text is quite well spaced, so it was easy to read. I did enjoy it. As always, when there are multiple perspectives, you often enjoy one or two more than the others, and that was the case here. I wasn't really interested in all the plastic surgery stuff. I did quite like, however, the considerations of class, particularly when you look at the distinctions that that are made based on where you're educated. So South Koreans who are educated in America and then return to South Korea are considered much higher class than even extremely wealthy Koreans who were educated in South Korea. So I found that quite interesting too. And those sorts of distinctions and layering in the class system. Then Breasts and Eggs I think it was actually a bit of a mess, because I think, okay, the main character, Natsuko, is also a bit of a mess. It was originally written as a novella and then expanded into a full novel, and I feel like you can tell, I feel like there's a very definite point where you're like, okay, that's the novella, and then this is the add-on. Because these two feels very definitely like two parts to this story. There were bits in this that I found quite heartbreaking. There were bits in this that I found quite poignant. And there are other bits that just I don't and I don't know if it's a cultural thing or if it's just that it didn't work for me. But again, there was discussions about plastic surgery, about appearance, about class, because this woman comes from a very poor background, relationships with your own body, relationships with the other women in your lives, the pressure to become a mother, even as a single woman, but at the same time, this woman wanted to become a mother. Did decide that she wanted to be a mother, but she's asexual, doesn't want to have a sexual relationship, even like just to have a child. That's not what she wants to do, but she can't get IVF as a single woman. It's even difficult. It would even be difficult if, for example, she was a lesbian. It would be almost impossible. So she's trying to find ways to become a mother. I found the writing very, very messy. But again, I think that was a stylistic choice on the part of the writer, Kawakami, but not necessarily for me. So those were the two books that I read for book club. Now, one of my goals for the year is to expand my reading a little bit, try different things. So I want to read more books along the lines of the things that I read with book club, but I want to try and read more widely. So this is one that I just picked up at the bookshop because I thought it sounded interesting, and that's The Girl and the Goddess by Nikita Gill. This is a novel in verse. So I think I might have only ever read one other novel in verse in my life. And this one is about a young Indian woman. So she's raised, I think she's raised in Delhi. And then towards the end, she starts university in London, so she moves to the UK. It is lovely. It is so beautiful, and there are so many just beautiful lines and beautiful moments, and so much that I found really powerful. She's an artist and a poet, and the Hindu gods are active in her life. They appear to her and they have conversations with her, and it's not like am I crazy, and it's not a magic thing. It's just that her religion is real, and it's active in her life. And the gods come and speak to her, and it's part of her poetry. She's also queer, and so this is not an option to her in India, to the point where she didn't know that it was a thing that other people were. So then she's trying to figure that out with herself, but at the same time keep it quiet, because she sort of becomes aware of the fact that if other people know, that's a bad thing. It was lovely and beautiful, and it's about empowering yourself and becoming a powerful woman and expressing yourself through your art. And I really liked it, so do recommend. The non-fiction book, the classic that I read in January, because I do want to read at least one classic novel every month this year, and classic, whether that's like a 19th century novel or a modern classic, or whatever the case may be. I want to be reading classics. So this month I read Frankenstein, a nice short one. It's been a while since I've read, this is obviously 1818, so it's been a while since I read something that old, and it took me a little bit to get like back into the swing of it. And there were sections that were harder to read than others. I thought it was I've never read Frankenstein before, and I've never seen any of the films or anything, so my knowledge of Frankenstein is like osmosis through pop culture. But I did know that it was, I always knew that it's, Frankenstein is the scientist, not the monster. And I did kind of know that the monster is a kind of like a periphery character in this. And I didn't know that there were framing devices and things, but it was interesting to see it. So it's from a character who, on a ship, who meets the scientist Frankenstein, and this character is writing letters to his sister about Frankenstein, as Frankenstein is telling him the story of his life, which includes the creation of the monster. So it's very interesting, and there are very definitely you can see those moments, you're on the island in a storm, and there's lightning and there's thunder, and those very dramatic gothic elements, they're definitely there. There's also a lot of I got a shock, so then I stayed in bed for 2 months and had other people had to look after me because I couldn't handle it. I was that shocked. But it was very, very clearly a novel about loneliness and about regret. And I thought that was it was interesting, but it was also quite dry. There were all these long sections that were really dry. So I'm glad that I've read it, but I don't need to reread this. I've done it now. And there is an essay at the end that I actually didn't read because I started to read the first paragraph and I'm like, I'm not feeling this. Maybe in the future I'll get to this essay. It's called The Nightmare of Romantic Idealism by Paul Cantor. I wasn't feeling it just after I finished the novel, so I might return to it at some point. But I have now read Frankenstein. Okay. Wow, I've been talking for 18 minutes and I'm not even finished yet. Okay, so I'll quickly talk about the digital things that I've read. So I read the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th novels in the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. Yes, Bridgerton, the TV show. I watched the series first, and then halfway through, I'm like, I've read this book. I have read this, because I was like, oh, Whistle Down with the gossip column and the voice and who is it? It's a secret. This is familiar. And then there was the Jewel, and I'm like, no, this Jewel very definitely know exactly what this is. So then I was like, I'm going to read it again. And I was reading it, I'm like, I haven't read this, but I've definitely read a different series with these elements in it. So I'm not sure what that series was, but I'm now reading, so I read the first 3 at the end of December, 4, 5, 6, and 7 over January. I'm trying to space out my romance reading this year because otherwise I get into the stress spirals where I'm stressed, so I I binge read romance novels and don't sleep because I'm awake all night reading, which then makes me more stressed and tired, which means that I'm reading more romance novels and then I don't remember them. They're just this big blur of stress, and I think there was a novel that I read about this and I don't remember what it was, so I'm trying to space them out. I'm not allowed to read more than one a week. So those were my 4 romance novels this week. I think book 6, When He Was Wicked, I believe. I think that's maybe my favourite one so far. So that's with Francesca, who is Francesca Bridgerton, but she's been widowed, and the romance is with her deceased husband's cousin. Her deceased husband's cousin is the new romantic interest. I also listened to 2 audiobooks, one of which was Headliner by Lucy Parker. Yes, that's another romance novel, but I allowed it because it was an audiobook. And that one is the last book in a series by Lucy Parker called London Celebrities. And I really liked that too. I thought that was really beautifully done and quite realistic. But that was very good and I enjoyed it. I do recommend that whole series, particularly as audiobooks. I haven't read them as text, but I've listened to all of them and they were all fabulous. The other audiobook that I listened to, I finally got my Audible subscription, and so the first one that I listened to was The Crow Trap by, oh my goodness, I can't remember who it's by. It's there's the Vera TV show. This is the first book on which that show was based. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Once I get my next little credit, I'm going to get the second book. I want to try out some crime novels. I think crime could do me well, and I think I want to do it as audios. We'll see how I go though. Whew, okay, so I've got 2 more books and a DNF left. So my speculative fiction books were Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I read the first 100 pages of this back in like September, and it's just taken me. I just put it down. Never really quite got back into it. I think it's the feel of the book in my hand. To be perfectly honest, I think that's what put me off. It's got like that matte kind of cover, and I don't like how that feels. And then the page stock is quite heavy, so the book is really heavy. And I think that's why I never picked it back up. Because I read it, I enjoyed it. I thought it was quite clever, quite funny. I really liked the world and the aesthetic of it and the atmosphere and the attitudes of the characters. I thought it was really fun and different and interesting. I didn't love it as much as I was expecting to, and I didn't love it as much as a lot of people that I follow on various social medias seem to just think it was the greatest thing ever. But I did enjoy it, and I will be picking up Harry the Ninth when I get a chance. This was the first book, Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, the first book that I read in 2021. It's 600 pages long. It was a 5-star read. It blew my mind. I have already done a review of it, so you can go and check that out to see what I thought about it in more detail. Sorry, I'm trying to hurry along a little bit because I've read a lot of books. And the next thing that I'm going to talk about, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is one that I actually DNF'd, and that is The Quantum Thief by Hanno Rajaniemi. It's a few years old now, and I picked it up because it was recommended as if you love Nine Fox Gambit, if you loved Ancillary Justice, this will be a book for you. And I loved those books. I hated this. I read 100 pages, and it's like 370 pages long. So I read nearly a third of it, like a quarter to a third of it. And I'm like, I still have no idea what happened. I have no idea who the characters were, what was going on. I probably could have pushed through, but I don't think I would have enjoyed it. I don't think I would have got anything out of it. So I DNF'd it, and I'm quite proud of myself for doing that, and it has been on my bookshelf for years, so now it is going away. So those are the 15 things and the 1 DNF that I read in January 2021. I'm not going to hold them up because they're big and heavy, but I would love to hear about what you read in this month, and was it a good reading month for you? I have big plans for the year, so I'm glad that I've got myself off to a good start. I'm Kate, this is my channel, and thanks for watching. Bye.